Great peace, great peace, great peace. Yakoki. Yakoki. All right, so I want to talk about how the world is sort of synchronized in a way that says, you know, falling pieces will occur. It's kind of like the domino effect. With a hot potato, you don't want to get caught with the hot potato. So let me say this. When you look at Asia, right, and you look at Africa, and then you look at the United States, this is what you see, right? You see Africa who doesn't necessarily want to mess languages up. They don't want to say, I'm Ghanaian, let's become a part of South Africa. I'm South African, let's become a part of Sierra Leone. I'm Sierra Leone, let's become a part of Mozambique. I'm Mozambique, let's become a part of Tanzania. You don't see that. And you don't see that in Asia either. You don't see the people in Hong Kong trying to get with the people in Mongolia. You know, these nations where all the people look alike, right? They war at each other, but not on a scale to where you say it would be nukes and nuclear wars happening and stuff like that, and bullets flying, and it's not that, right? This is what you see though. You see like Americans, they take for granted of speaking a different language. You know what I mean? So you ask yourself, you say, well, since we're all related and, blacks, whites, Mexicans, Hispanics, Latinos, and since we're all related, we have 10 fingers, 10 toes, different concentrations of melanin, different proportions of noses, eyes, depths. This is something that I've kind of looked at, and I thought like, okay, did the Americans come from Africa, or was it the other way around? And I thought about it long and hard, and I said, well, the Sudanese, some of their oldest people within that particular tribe, they look like the people who were in Asia. Then I look at the Mongolians, and I said, there's some people who look Mongol in America. Then I said, okay, well, Americans and Sudanese, they must be closely related. And then I look at my background, and not without looking at my DNA, I look at my face and I say, I see people who look Congolese in Cameroon who look like me. The Egyptian nose, the slanted Egyptian eyes that you see on a Sphinx. And like, I'm just thinking like, okay, is this, how did all of this happen? How did all of this happen? Then I sit there and I study Sudanese, and I say, they stick together. They don't too much care about speaking in their native tongue. And I say, what do they know that I don't know? Then I look at Asians, and Asians, they care about keeping their language. They do. They don't associate with people outside of Asia. All right, so I look at, okay, you have Cameroon, you have Sudan, and, you look at all the other nations, none of them necessarily associate with Americans. You see what I mean? It's only the Sudanese who associate with Americans. And you have, second, right, who would be Ethiopians, right? So it's Sudanese and Ethiopians who really associate with Americans, right? Then you look at Americans and you say, well, outside of all the mixing that's occurred, who are they? Then you look at the Americans and you say, Okay, the people from Alabama, right? The people from Mississippi, the Mississippian people, they come directly from Mexico. You know, my father, he's from Mississippi. My grandfather, he's from Mississippi. My grandmother, she's from Mississippi. Then you look at, the people from California. Well, they came from Mississippi and Alabama. And, you look at how all the human patterns kind of took in place and how people have just became about. And it becomes apparent that you still have families who are alive who were the beginning of families starting to mix. We're the beginning. So, like, this is what I want to say. Like, when you look at human patterns and you look at how people, they want to keep their language, some people don't care about keeping their language. I think you got to look at the Sudanese and really kind of think about, where, their path have been. Because, like, that's the main war that's happening right now outside of Israel and Palestine. That's the main war. So you look at Sudan and you say Sudan and, they're into it with the people in North Sudan, the people in South Sudan. They're into it. The nihilistic people, they don't like Arabs. The nihilistic people, the Nehi people, right? That's what I call them. They're closely related to the people in Chicago. These are the people who do more things, in a sense, less strict, right? They herd the cows, they herd the bulls, they herd, cattle and, sheep, goats. But they also live commercially like, a lot of the people here in America do. But when you look at, the Arabs who are in North Sudan, they tend to be more militant. They tend to be more strict. It's a hands-off policy with their women, right? But the South Sudanese, they sort of embrace democracy, where democracy is demand. You get to, say what you want to say. You get to fight for what you want. That's democracy, right? They embrace it. So I think, like, as we kind of look at this and we kind of peel the onion back and we kind of see, like, civilization, where it's going, right? And it's especially with the wars, you're basically going to see Sudanese, Chinese, all the other nations that are in the eastern regions related to the southern hemisphere of Russia, including Japan. All of these people are going to, they're going to form links. They're going to form links. And I think, like, when you look at how the Congolese are kind of like, they're left out of everything, where they're kind of just left to party in some of their states and not necessarily engage in war. And you look at how the South Sudanese are kind of pushed around to different places, like Netherlands and America and Mexico. They're pushed around. This is what you're going to see happen with blacks in America. Blacks are going to be put in a position, and you're seeing it now. They're going to be forced to, get passports and, get visas, because the economies that we saw back in the 80s, when I wasn't born, and before that, they're not coming back. The car industry that was in Detroit, it's not coming back. So they're moving forward with a different plan. And, they've left a lot of black people out. And so you wonder, like, what happened to all the black people who were in these cities? They either went to the suburbs or they went back to Africa, and I can say that just from glancing, looking at the community and seeing things kind of take place and kind of operate and change different directions. And also watching, vlogs on YouTube and seeing how people talk about their daily lives and where they've been and where they're going. That's what it's really been. Black people have been going to other places throughout time and leaving America. And they've been kind of IDing, white people as, the people who would sort of, guide them in and, take them into the places where they can find sort of like neat secrets out. And that's what you've basically been seeing. I see it all the time. Like I see it, and Africans, they're going to be the new Americans because they're coming. Africans are going to be the new Americans. And I think like when you look at African Americans, they've been classed out because of their past. They've been put in a binder where the countries necessarily haven't been coming to their aid in the open sense that there be a clear line of communication, because there hasn't been, right? While there have been things behind the scenes suggesting that they have been being saved, you can see that the average black person, when they ask a question to someone who may know something that may be a secret, they're kind of pushed back, like get away. And that's what we've been seeing, because I've been documenting it, right? Even in my own life, even in my own life, like I had to figure a lot of things out on my own. And I didn't have, because, my mother, my father, they didn't necessarily have experience in the sense that they would tell me certain things that would guide me along in the sense that African Americans use white people for, right? And then when you look at white people, right, they're in the same position as African Americans are in, and they've been that since, they've come to America in the late 1800s, so that's just what it is during the Reconstruction era. You look at all the farms we had in the South, now you say like, what is going to happen with all of that? You know what I mean? Well, Africans, they've essentially been protected on the global scale, right? They've been essentially been protected. So when you look at how all the industries that are in the South as it relates to agriculture and how it will affect African Americans, say if they're already here or if they haven't left or if they haven't moved into suburbs with whites, who's going to get those lands, those cotton fields now? Who's going to get them, And then you do have a lot of black people who are still here who are fighting for those rights to not leave what was, theirs before. But even in doing that, right, you're going to see that some of them are not going to be protected, because if you're carrying a sense of constantly fighting what the government already knows and what the government is not telling you, then they're going to swoop in and take your land from you. If you haven't already claimed it. And a lot of them are claiming it the wrong way, right? They're talking about land patents. Do you really want to, say this is your land because of a land patent? You know what I mean? I've kind of looked at that and I thought about it long and hard. When I did my video a while ago, I did a video a while ago about how we should use land patents. And, I thought about it. I said, if we get the land, right, through the land patents, through judge procedures and judge processes, through law processes, through law procedures, if we get the land back, how is it going to be kept up? How is it going to be administrated? Like you get land and you say this land belongs to this person because his grandparents were here and during this time. Well, that's the thing, right? Some of these lands that had land patents, they're abandoned now. No one owns them. It's under the state's administrative processes, which means, it's probably up for sale and no one can necessarily buy it because they can't afford the price tag. So you look at Sudanese, they're getting the money, they're getting the funding, and China is going to back them. That's who China wants to get to. It's the Sudanese. That's who China wants to get to. This is why you're seeing the war happen right now between the North and the South there. The Chinese is going to come in and split them up. They're going to come in and split them up. And they're going to give Sudanese a lot of assets. And Sudanese are going to start buying the lands up here in America. That's what you're going to see. So this is what I'm saying. Like, while you can use the land patent, it's like, is it really going to be realized? You know what I mean? Because China owns most of the land right now. And they have contracts in Africa. So, like, if China can't pay their debt back, what you think was going to happen with the land in America? This is why I'm telling African Americans, wherever you are in the world, you need to start buying Sudanese money. Like right now. Right now. Because whatever happens to war people, war encampments, war refugees, the money goes where they're at. We see it in Detroit with the Yemeni. They have all the gas stations, all the grocery stores. Now you say, well, what about the Polish? The Polish people, they have land. You look at the farms in most of the western regions and like most of the east regions and like Virginia, it's all, even the mills in like Chicago, right? They're all operated by white people, Polish people, right? They all are. And it's been that way since they came here. And like, no one is saying like, you know, why is this happening? You know, well, people have been saying like they're confused about the things that are happening and stuff like that, but they don't know how to approach the situation. You know, you haven't prepared yourself for combatants with a world power. So it's like, do you rely on the U.S. Army? Do you rely on the U.S. Navy? Do you repatriate? How do you do it? And this is why I said, like, you have to start investing in money. And people don't know that their USD can purchase a lot of things. And people don't necessarily know the value of the things that they're purchasing. Like, you see someone who takes the USD and they go to, like, do frivolous things with it when they can be buying Sudanese money with it, when they can be buying Congolese money with it, when they can be buying Tanzania gold. They're not doing this. They're focused on emotionalism and saying that the Africans are doing this, the Africans are doing that. I don't like Africans. And it's like, well, they're backed by China. So if you have these African nations who are backed by China, especially the Sudanese, you know, you look at the Sudanese in America, right? And you go to some of the states where they're at, they have nice properties. You take a black person in America who lives on the south side of Chicago, you know, the east side of Detroit, you know, the north side of Cleveland, you take them, right? And you say like, you know, I've been working all my life, you know, and I can't get a pension and I can't get a home. Like, it's people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s still living with their parents, and they're working a job that they worked at since they were a teen and have no savings. Sudanese are coming here like, I want that over there, right there. And this is the thing about Africans. When they come over here, they're not telling people how they're getting, you know, their program money. And, you know, this again, like, if you're a war refugee, right? If you're that, because that's who African Americans are going to be, you know, in a bit. You know, if you're that, right, then you got to look at, you know, the monies they're getting. Like, how are they getting that money, you know? And this is where they stay secret about the things of their intergovernmental affairs, intergovernmental affairs. They're keeping secret about it. And black people, they can't figure out. All they can do is just say, you know, keep up with the xenophobia. So it's like, you know, is that going to work? Is that going to work? So you see, Africans, they take language very seriously. Asians, they're relaxed on language. African Americans, they don't care about language. So you see, everybody came from Africa, went east, and then the people who were in the east, They went up north into the Russian mountains, and they went across the Pacific into California and into Mexico. Sudanese, those are the Olmecs. Sudanese, those are the Russians. Congolese, those are the Mississippians. Cameroonians, those are the Illinoisans. Break the words up. Look at the interchangement between the vowels and the consonants. See who these people really are. They'll answer you where you're going to be going within the next 10 years as it relates to who's the warring powers and who's the warring victims. Right now, pay attention to North Sudan, South Sudan. Pay attention to Congolese, and not necessarily the Rwandans, but pay attention to them. And then you have Israel and Palestine. That war is pretty much over with. The Afro-Palestinians, no one's heard from them. Israel, that's a state that's just been made up by the people who were backing the Ethiopian Jews. Then the American Israelites went over there with the Ethiopian Jews. Now you have a mixture there. Now you have people saying between the two, they're Israelites. They're Israel now. They're the original Jews. That's what everybody's saying. They're Judah now. So if you're in the States, like right now, pay attention to Chicago. Pay attention to Atlanta. And that's pretty much about it. Pay attention to those two states right there, Atlanta and Chicago. Pay attention to those places, and we'll see how this ultimately divides up as it relates to who's going to get reparations and who's going to get refugee benefits. Two completely different things. Great peace, Yakoki.